Good afternoon. I'm Rei Magosaki, Associate Professor of English in Wilkinson College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Today, I am delighted to host Online at the Musco series entitled Tsunami of Memory. Ahead of the violinist and composer Kishi Bashi's residency and concert on October 23rd. Today, we're also lucky to be joined by Christine Kitano, among the new generation of poets to emerge in the last decade, to share with us her poems which grapple with the World War II wartime incarceration history in her poetry collections, Birds of Paradise in 2011 and Sky Country in 2017. So I have asked Christine to do a selected reading of her poems referencing Topaz War Relocation Center in Utah. And that is my simple introduction, but Christine, the floor is yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Rei. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm going to read to you all some poems from my two collections. And I'll start with my first collection, Birds of Paradise. And in these poems, I do talk about the war relocation experience, though I do it from a little bit more of a distance. And then you'll see as I get into the poems in Sky Country, I get closer to actually reimagining that experience. So I'll start with a poem from Birds of Paradise, and this is called Lost in the Move. Lost in the Move. Photograph, ballet recital, age 6. The applause has stopped. The mothers and fathers have ushered their daughters home, draping crushed velvet coats over pink leotards. Waiting alone under the empty lights, I crouch down to the stage and collect shed rose petals. My mother clicks the camera by accident, trying to wind the film. Photograph, Aunt Chizu, age 22, Topaz Internment Camp, Utah, July 1944. Her smile is wide and sun-bright on the black and white film. She points to the laces of her saddle shoes. Tar, she'd say, 60 years later, shaking her head, it melted in the sun, sticking our souls to the ground. She'd smile again to herself and laugh, your father brought his trombone. Photograph, 7th birthday. I pinch the pigtail of a large orange balloon and smile despite the fear I feel that at any moment the balloon will break free, slip away, disappear up a chimney of clouds. In the background, my father leans against the yellow porch swing and tips the lip of a glass tumbler, swallowing his medication with wine. So in my first collection, I talk a lot about my father, about my family, about the memories of the incarceration, but most of them are filtered through other people's experiences. And so these are two more poems that illustrate the sense of distance I think I felt with my father and my sense of distance that I felt to the stories of the incarceration. So this is called Picture of My Father as a Young Man. He's just about to stand, left knee to the grass, right foot extended, ready to push his weight up. His hands, large and sunlit, still betray a tension around the knuckles, a force that might form a fist. Years later, after closing his eyelids with a wet washcloth, a nurse will struggle to free the hospital sheet from his stiffened grip. But here he's in motion, finding his rhythm, curls swept high by a wind. And this is where I reference the incarceration most directly in this book. And it's based on stories that I had heard from my father and also stories that had been passed down from my grandmother. And this is called 1945, My Father Leaves Topaz Internment Camp, Utah. At war's end, my father, 19, rode the train from Salt Lake to Milwaukee to take a job killing cows. For that 1 year, he stopped eating meat. If you strike, he said, the hollow between the animal's eyes, and if the axe is right, the pain is quick. The cow's heavy collapse, the worst sound he'd remember. When the families were herded into trains with unknown destinations, my grandmother dressed her children in their best clothes in case they were being taken away to be shot. She might have shrugged when she saw the neighbors dressed in rags for the same uncertainty. So those are from my first collection, Birds of Paradise. And I knew that the incarceration experience was something that I wanted to continue writing about. But I did feel like in my second collection, I had to get closer to the experience. So I did a lot of research. I learned about the incarceration from history books and textbooks. And I talked to family to get those stories a little bit more directly firsthand. And so what I ended up doing was after all the research, I thought of a character who approximated myself at the time. So I started writing these poems when I was in my mid to late 20s. I had just moved to Texas and I was surrounded by women who were giving birth and having their first children. And I was thinking about how that experience, which felt so vital to them, would be layered onto the incarceration experience. So I took what was happening to me in the moment and I thought about what would that be like in this historical context. So I imagined this character who would have been a young mother during the incarceration, and I sort of trace her remembrance of the experience. So I'll read from Sky Country now, and this is a poem called Gaman, and the word gaman is a Japanese term that loosely translates to endurance, persistence, perseverance. And it's a word that has been used to understand the Japanese American response to the incarceration. And I wanted to reimagine that term for this particular character. So this is called Gaman, and I imagine a person who is looking back on this particular moment. It was night when the buses stopped. It was too dark to see the road, or if there was a road. So we waited, we watched. We thought of back home, how the orchards would swell with fruit, how the trees would strain, then give way under their ripe weight. The pockmarked moon, the face of an apple pitted with rot. But of course not. Someone would intervene, would make of our absence a profit. When we came, the boat anchored at San Francisco Bay swayed for hours. The gauntlet of uniformed men so intent on finding cause to turn us away. And now again, we wait, we watch. Our American children press against us with their small backs, which gives us pause. For the sake of the children, we'll teach them to forgive the fears of others, the offenses. But what we don't anticipate is how the dust of the desert will clot our throats, how much fear will conspire to keep us silent, and how our children will read this silence as shame, however much we tried, we thought, to demonstrate grace. When the buses stopped, it was too dark to see the road, or if there was a road. It was night, and instead of speaking, we waited. Instead of speaking, we watched. So the next few poems I'll read is in the same character's voice. And this one imagines her in camp in February 1943. So this is February 1943, Topaz Concentration Camp, Utah, and it's written after a poem by Thomas Transtromer. In February, life stands still. The sky is empty, endless blue. Like a boat leashed to a dock, the body carves the same groove in the same circle of water. The skeletal trees do not meet our gaze. The mountains too are turned away. The snow's depth, as if a miracle, remains unchanged. No one comes to say hello or goodbye. Trapped in their own rhythm, cyclones of powdered snow wheel in and out through the cracks. But one day, something approaches the window. The children rustle from the corners. The eye strains to see what color blazes. For a moment, everything turns around. This is called Equinox. Equinox. Blame the late storm, or blame the earth itself, ice-stunned soil smothering the torn green shoots. Once we lived, but now an empty house, an empty field, an orchard emptying of fruit. At home so long, then by dawn we were gone. This dawn, Utah's mountains trimmed with a thin purple cold. But even this winter eases into spring. Elsewhere, water must rush forth. Mist clears, leaves must brighten to green. With or without permission, another season will pass. The fence leans its shadow, but for how long can one stand against what the natural world springs toward? This next poem I'll read, I think, is the last poem I actually wrote for the collection as a whole. And it was a poem that has gone through many revisions, and I was trying to portray the complexity of this speaker, of this character. And it's a struggle to write this poem, and I don't think it's quite done yet, but I do think it captures the complexity of what it must have been like to live through this. And it's called I Will Explain Hope. But not today, not when the wind carries only the voices of geese crying, but sailing far above our human heads. Down here, I'd swear I feel the earth's subtle tug on its slow travel around a distant sun. But I'd also believe time stopped within this patch of desert, that elsewhere lives go on making marked progress, but we remain stranded within a stalled circle, surrounded by a light that fails and fails to reach us. How far and fast it travels, this light that is already dead. How far and fast it must journey, the prayer whispered in the dark. What choice but to forgive such a brave failure? This is called Fireflies. Because they have never seen anything like it, the city children weave through the barracks calling us to come see. Our stories of fireflies in Japan must echo in their young heads, how we picnic in summer heat to watch the lit bodies punctuate the dark. Better than Christmas, we told them. So when they pull us into the Utah night, how to tell them these pulsing clouds are not fireflies, but moths. Still, we chase them through the desert fields, the children cupping small fists around moon-whitened wings that collapse, not from the children's touch, but the sheer pressure of air. My mother would say the fireflies are the lights of soldiers killed in a war far away, their spirits now wandering the earth in search of home. But these are not fireflies. How to say fireflies don't come to Utah, how to say how close or far we are from home. How to say where we are at all. My daughter catches one, its brief body torn and flickering in her palm. I teach her the word hotaru, firefly. Together, we trace the letters in the dirt with our fingers. But the next morning, when she peeks outside, she cries to find the characters gone, the name on the earth already erased by the wind. So throughout these poems, I'm imagining the speaker both in the moment of living in Topaz and from a more retrospective view. And then this poem about the trees really imagines what it would be like to look back on this experience. It's called About the Trees, and it opens with an epigraph from Margaret Atwood, which reads, "Here is the handful of shadow I have brought back to you, this decay, this hope, this mouthful of dirt, this poetry." Somewhere in central Utah, off the loneliest road in America, grows a plot of scattered trees. That first fall, men carved shrubs from the surrounding mountains and transplanted them around camp. Sure they'd die, we were all surprised when, in spring, knuckles of green burst from the branches. The soil was grainy and soft as sand. The trees were a miracle, as if born from a handful of shadow. Maybe miracle is too strong a word. I once thought it easy to believe a vivid memory was all that mattered. But now sometimes I see the trunks skeletal and bare, the branches hardened to iron, or they're lush as evergreens in winter. How much depends on how we're willing to remember. Now I sleep in an air-conditioned room and watch television long past dark. And when they ask me about camp, I sift through memories for a funny anecdote, the food or the smell of the latrines. This morning, I woke before dawn. I stared at the clock's neon numbers, my hands again full of shadows. Believe me, the men were not angry, but when they dug the trees from the earth, anger bled through their hands. The men returned with the trees over their shoulders, the stunned roots aloft and curled into incomplete fists. So when I was looking over the poems for the reading today, I realized that that's a repeated image. That in Birds of Paradise, I describe my father's fists about to form, and then that image comes back here. And I think there's something about just that silence and the strong emotion that you always sense in some ways, but you don't always have direct access to that. So I hope that that in some ways is coming across in this work. I'll read one last poem, and this is another poem that I was revising right up until the date of publication, or the date that they sent the book to the printers. And I couldn't quite find the right ending for a long time. And then finally I got to the ending that I have, and I feel like it's the resonant moment that I was looking for. So it's a short poem. 1942, in response to Executive Order 9066, my father 16 takes, no spare underwear, no clean shirts, pants, or good shoes. Instead, a suitcase of records, his trombone. This is not the whole story, and yet it is true. It is a story without an ending. And when I open my mouth to speak, it continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I feel the resonance at the end. It feels like the end of a piece, and this sort of moment, which is a treat. It's wonderful to hear these readings, and I really want to thank you. I appreciate it.